The fluorescent office lights hummed overhead, harsh and unyielding, as Tiana Marshall adjusted the stack of reports on her desk. She had stayed late for the third night this week, fingers numb from typing, eyes strained from staring at spreadsheets that no one seemed to appreciate. The click of the glass door echoed in the empty office, and before she could turn, her manager, Gerald Kramer, loomed in the doorway with that familiar smirk, half charm, half threat. "Tiana, is this really the standard you're bringing to the team?" His tone was casual, but the sting of condescension wrapped around every word. He leaned over her desk, scanning her work like a predator. "I don't know why we even keep you on some days." Tiana's stomach dropped. She had felt this before. This subtle narrowing of eyes, the pauses when she spoke in meetings, the invisible barrier between her and promotion. But now, with only the faint hum of computers around them, it felt like a trap closing. I think these numbers are accurate," she said, voice tight. Gerald's laugh was soft, cruel, almost intimate. "Accurate? Maybe. But somehow, never enough, is it?" He tapped her shoulder with a casual, mocking pressure. "Honestly, I don't know why we hired you at all." Tiana froze, heart-hammering memories of whispered office jokes and sideways glances flashing through her mind. Then, in a quiet fury, she reached into her bag and pulled out the document she had memorized word for word. Her signed employment contract. She met his gaze. "You're forgetting something, Gerald." He raised an eyebrow, confused, just as her hand hovered over the contract. The air thickened. A single moment, and everything could change, if he realized what she held in her hands. Tiana Marshall straightened her papers with a trembling hand, trying to ignore the dull ache behind her eyes. The office was quiet except for the steady hum of fluorescent lights, punctuated by the occasional clatter of a keyboard. She had stayed late 3 nights this week, yet somehow Gerald Kramer, her manager, seemed to find fault in everything she did. "Really, Tiana?" Gerald's voice cut across the empty office like glass breaking. She looked up, heart thudding, to see him leaning against her desk with that smug expression, one eyebrow raised. "These projections. Do you even understand what they mean?" I double-checked them," Tiana replied, voice tight. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as if it could shield her from his gaze. He let out a low laugh. "Double-checked? Maybe. But somehow never enough, is it?" He tapped a pen against the spreadsheet. "Honestly, I don't know why we hired you at all." Tiana's chest tightened. She had faced microaggressions before, dismissive comments, subtle jokes, but this direct, public undermining felt like a punch. She looked at the small group of colleagues nearby, pretending to focus on their own work, their silence screaming complicity. "Gerald, I've been working hard on this," she began, but he cut her off with a flick of his hand, dismissive, almost casual. "Hard work doesn't always equal competence," he said, smiling faintly as if sharing a private joke. The words landed like stones in her chest. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the fear of retaliation pinned her tongue. Memories of past promotions denied, subtle exclusions, whispered meetings behind closed doors, flashed through her mind. The office walls seemed to close in, fluorescent lights harsh above her, humming a relentless reminder of her vulnerability. Her fingers brushed the leather of her bag. Something inside her stirred, anger, clarity, resolve. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out the thick folder she had memorized, her signed employment contract resting inside. Gerald noticed the movement and tilted his head, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "What's that?" She met his gaze, voice low but steady. "You're forgetting something, Gerald." Confusion crossed his face, then a flash of unease. Tiana opened the folder, letting the edge of the paper peek out. Every clause she had studied, every legal protection she had painstakingly noted, was ready to counter his intimidation. For a heartbeat, the office felt suspended in time. The hum of lights, the soft scratching of pens, even Gerald's confident smirk seemed to hold its breath. "You really think that paper will change anything?" he said, the smirk faltering just slightly. Tiana's hand rested on the contract. It already has, she said, letting a calm fury shine in her eyes. Gerald took a step back, uncertainty creeping into his posture. Tiana felt the weight of years of subtle humiliation shift into something tangible. The air between them tightened, suspense crackling. For the first time, the predator in the office felt the edge of the hunt turn. And yet, the moment hung unresolved. Could she leverage the contract without risking everything? The question lingered in the fluorescent-lit silence, heavy as a gavel waiting to fall. By morning the office had changed. Not in layout, not in policy, but in sound. Tiana felt it the moment she stepped out of the elevator. Voices dip. Laughter cut short. Someone coughed too loudly, as if to cover the silence that followed her footsteps across the carpet. She kept her head forward, shoulders squared, the contract folder tucked safely into her bag like a pulse she could feel through the leather. "Hey, Tiana." She turned to see Marisol from accounting standing near the printer, eyes darting down the hall. Her voice was low, careful. "Hey," Tiana said. Marisol hesitated, fingers twisting a strand of hair. "About yesterday. I just wanted to say, I saw how he talked to you." Tiana searched her face. And it wasn't right," Marisol finished quickly. "But you know how Gerald is. She stopped herself, lips pressing together. "Just be careful. Be careful." The phrase echoed like a warning label slapped over injustice. "Thanks," Tiana said softly. Marisol nodded, relief flashing across her face as she turned back to the printer. The machine whirred to life, loud and mechanical, filling the space where courage might have gone. At her desk, Tiana logged in and opened her email. Overnight, Gerald had sent a message to the entire team. Reminder: all reports must reflect accuracy and professionalism. There will be zero tolerance for substandard work. No names, no accusations. Yet somehow, it felt branded across her forehead. Across the aisle, Jason leaned back in his chair, spinning a pen between his fingers. "Rough day yesterday, huh?" Tiana glanced up. "You could say that." He shrugged. "Gerald's just under a lot of pressure. He's hard on everyone." She looked at him, then really looked. "Is he?" Jason's pen stopped spinning. "I mean, yeah, you know. Tough love." Tiana exhaled slowly. "Funny. I don't remember him asking you if you even deserved to be hired." Jason's mouth opened, then closed. He looked away. "I didn't hear everything." "No," she said. "You didn't." The morning meeting was worse. Gerald stood at the head of the conference table, sleeves rolled up, confidence back in place like armor polished overnight. He smiled as people filtered in, clapped Jason on the shoulder, joked with Lisa about weekend plans. When Tiana sat down, his eyes flicked over her and moved on, as if she were a chair someone had forgotten to push in. "Let's talk performance," Gerald said, clicking to the first slide. "Some of us are exceeding expectations." He nodded at two white analysts. They smiled. "And some of us," he continued, voice smooth, "need to revisit the basics." Tiana felt heat crawl up her neck. She raised her hand. "Are there specific metrics you want to address?" The room stilled. Gerald tilted his head. "This isn't personal, Tiana. If the shoe fits, then name the shoe," she said calmly. A sharp inhale rippled around the table. Gerald's smile tightened. "Let's stay professional." Her hands curled under the table. Professional. The word had been used like a leash, yanked whenever she stepped too close to dignity. After the meeting, she ducked into the hallway, chest tight. Voices floated from the break room. "She's always so defensive." Well, you know how those situations go. She should just keep her head down. Tiana stopped walking. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They were said the way people spoke about weather. Inevitable, impersonal, not worth fighting. She pushed into the restroom and locked herself in a stall. The hum of the vent filled her ears. She sat on the closed lid, pressing her palms into her knees. This was the pattern, she realized. Not just Gerald. The silence. The shrugging. The way concern dissolved into self-preservation the moment it asked for risk. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, you okay? She frowned, then typed back. Who is this? It's Denise. Tiana's stomach dropped. Can we talk later today? Denise wrote. Just informal. Informal. Another word that meant nothing and everything at once. Back at her desk, Tiana opened a blank document and began to type. March 3rd. Gerald questioned my competence in front of team. Statement. I don't know why we hired you at all. Witnesses present. Her fingers moved faster as memory sharpened. Emails. Meetings where her ideas were ignored until repeated by someone else. Performance reviews filled with vague language. Needs polish, could be a better cultural fit. Lunch. Lisa stopped by, arms crossed. HR's asking questions. Tiana didn't look up. Are they? Lisa shifted. You know this could get messy. It already is. Lisa sighed. I just don't want this to blow back on the team. Tiana finally met her eyes. Funny how justice always threatens teamwork. Lisa flushed. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. When Lisa walked away, Tiana's hands shook, but she kept typing. By the end of the day, her document was 4 pages long. As the office emptied, Gerald passed her desk. He paused. Still here? He asked lightly. Trying to prove something. She looked up, calm settling over her like armor she'd earned. Just keeping records. His eyes narrowed just for a second. Careful, Tiana. People who make noise don't always like what follows. She smiled faintly. I'm done being quiet. Gerald walked away, but his footsteps weren't as confident as before. Tiana saved the document and closed her laptop. In the quiet that followed, she knew one thing with certainty. The whispers had already begun, and this time she was listening. The HR office smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. The kind of sterile smell meant to make people feel safe, but it only made Tiana's stomach knot tighter. Denise, the HR manager, sat behind her desk, hands folded, eyes cautious. Across from her, Gerald Kramer lounged in the visitor's chair. His posture casual, smile rehearsed. Thanks for coming, Denise began, glancing at both of them. Tiana, you requested this meeting? Tiana nodded. Yes. I want to discuss yesterday, how I was spoken to, and ongoing issues I've experienced. Gerald leaned back, crossing his arms. I think this is overblown. Yesterday was a misunderstanding. Tiana's jaw tightened. A misunderstanding is when someone misreads an email. This was a public humiliation. You questioned my competence and even my hiring in front of colleagues. He shrugged. I was giving feedback. Nothing personal. Denise's pen hovered over a notepad. Tiana, can you give examples? Tiana pulled out the folder, the same one she had shown him the day before, and set it on the desk. Here. My signed employment contract. I've also documented instances where my work has been unfairly criticized or ignored. Gerald glanced at the folder, then back at Tiana, smirk fading into a flicker of irritation. Contracts don't cover subjective opinions on performance. That's what performance reviews are for. They do actually, Tiana said firmly, flipping to a highlighted clause. This section protects against wrongful demotion, arbitrary criticism, and discriminatory treatment. And yes, documented bias counts. Denise's eyebrows rose slightly, interest peaked. Gerald's lips pressed into a thin line. Are you seriously trying to use a contract to invalidate managerial feedback? He asked, voice sharp now. No, Tiana said evenly. I'm asking for fairness and accountability. The feedback I receive should be objective, consistent, and documented. What I've experienced is none of that. I've been singled out in ways my colleagues haven't. Microaggressions, dismissals, comments about my abilities that don't reflect my work. Gerald laughed, low and condescending. You're being dramatic. Every employee gets critiqued. Don't pretend this is about race. Tiana's chest tightened, but she kept her voice calm. I'm not pretending. Pattern is clear. I've watched similar behavior towards me escalate in ways it hasn't with others. And the documentation proves it. This isn't about feelings. It's about evidence. Denise scribbled notes quickly, her expression unreadable. Gerald, do you want to respond to that? He leaned forward slightly. Look, Tiana, everyone feels singled out sometimes. I treat people based on merit. If you feel targeted, maybe it's perception, not intention. Tiana shook her head. No, the problem isn't perception. It's the repeated actions. It's the jokes, the dismissals in meetings, the constant undermining. I've tried to remain professional, but professional doesn't mean silent. And I won't accept being treated this way anymore. Denise's gaze softened slightly at that. Tiana, it's important we handle this carefully. We need facts, timelines, and witness statements. Have you collected that? Yes, Tiana said, lifting the folder slightly. Every incident I can remember, with dates, emails, and people present. Gerald shifted uncomfortably in his chair. This is ridiculous. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. HR shouldn't be wasting time with accusations that aren't. Accusations backed by evidence, Tiana interrupted, voice steady but firm. Aren't accusations, they're proof of a pattern. And if nothing changes, it will continue. I've seen what happens when these things go unchallenged. That's why I documented everything. Denise nodded, glancing between them. Gerald, we'll need to review these materials thoroughly. This may involve higher management and possibly legal review. Tiana, will support you through this process, but I need you to remain professional. I am, Tiana said. I just need my work environment to reflect that professionalism. That includes respect, fairness, and accountability. The room fell silent. Gerald's smirk had disappeared entirely, replaced by a tight, uncomfortable mask. He tapped his fingers on the chair arm. The air was thick, charged. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. He no longer seemed untouchable. Fine, Gerald muttered. Do what you need. But don't expect this to be easy for anyone. Tiana felt a rush of quiet triumph. He had underestimated her resolve, and now the very process he thought would be routine would expose his favoritism and bias. Denise stood, signaling the end of the meeting. We'll schedule follow-ups and gather statements. Everyone will have the chance to provide input. Tiana packed up her folder slowly, heart pounding. She felt the weight of the battle ahead, but also the clarity that she had taken the first step. Every incident now had a record. Every slight had a witness. The strategy was simple: persistence, documentation, and courage. As she walked back to her desk, Gerald's eyes followed her. No words, just a stare that hinted at frustration, and the recognition that she was no longer defenseless. Once seated, she opened a fresh document and began typing the day's events into her ongoing log. Every word felt like a shield, every fact a weapon. Outside the window, the city hummed along, unaware of the silent fight for justice taking place in a fluorescent-lit office. By the time she shut down her computer, Tiana felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and empowerment. She knew the road ahead would be long, that Gerald would push back, and that the office culture might resist. But she had started something no one could ignore. And for the first time in months, Tiana allowed herself to believe she might actually win. The next morning, Tiana arrived early, the city streets still hushed under a pale sunrise. She carried her laptop, the contract folder, and a notebook filled with meticulous observations. Every step toward the office felt purposeful, a quiet declaration that she was no longer invisible. At her desk, she opened her laptop and began cataloging every instance of bias treatment. Emails where her suggestions were ignored until echoed by someone else, meeting notes highlighting when Gerald interrupted her, and comments from colleagues that hinted at favoritism. Each entry was dated, precise, unemotional. Documentation, she reminded herself, was power. Marisol appeared at her side, hesitant but determined. I noticed how you handled that meeting yesterday, she said softly. I've seen some of the same things happen. I can help if you want. Tiana glanced up. Are you sure? I am. It's uncomfortable for me too, but someone has to speak up. I can provide dates, emails, even witness statements. Gerald doesn't get to control the narrative forever. Tiana smiled faintly, a flicker of hope warming the knot in her chest. Thank you. That means more than you know. Throughout the morning, she reached out discreetly to other colleagues who had witnessed or been affected by Gerald's behavior. Some refused to get involved, citing fear of retaliation or disbelief that HR would act. Others, like Marisol, quietly shared their experiences, offering corroborating details. Tiana recorded everything, careful to preserve anonymity when requested. By lunchtime, the pile of evidence was growing. She had a folder for emails, another for screenshots, a notebook full of transcribed conversations. Each piece was another brick in the foundation she was building. But as she worked, Gerald's presence loomed. He passed her desk several times, leaning slightly, watching, testing. Busy, Tiana? He asked once, his tone light, casual. Just organizing files, she replied, calm but unwavering. Careful, he said, smirking. People notice when you're aggressive with paperwork. Tiana's fingers hovered over the keyboard, resisting the urge to snap. Instead, she smiled faintly. I'm just thorough. Later, during a team meeting, Gerald praised Jason for a minor project improvement while barely acknowledging her contributions. She took mental notes, later adding the interaction to her growing log of unequal treatment. Every oversight, every subtle dismissal, was a testament to the pattern she was building. After the meeting, she sat with Lisa, who finally admitted in hushed tones, I didn't realize how bad it was. I thought, maybe I was imagining things. You weren't, Tiana said firmly. It's been happening for months, maybe years. I just documented it. Evidence changes the conversation. Lisa nodded slowly. I can back you up if needed. By the end of the day, Tiana had amassed a detailed timeline stretching over several months. Emails highlighted inconsistencies in Gerald's feedback. Meeting notes revealed patterns of interruption and dismissal. Witness statements, written and typed, confirmed the repeated nature of his microaggressions. Every piece was a mirror showing the disparity between his words and actions. Back at her desk, she reviewed everything. A sense of quiet satisfaction filled her, a different feeling from vindictive triumph. This was strategy, not anger. She was turning invisible patterns of bias into visible proof. Her phone buzzed. A text from Denise in HR. Reviewing initial documentation. Keep detailed records. We may need more witnesses. Tiana typed back. Understood. Already compiling everything. As the office emptied, she closed her laptop and packed her folders into her bag. The quiet hum of fluorescent lights felt different now, less oppressive. She had done something proactive, something that gave her agency in a space that had always tried to suppress it. Outside, the late afternoon sun splashed the streets with gold. Tiana paused on the steps of the building, letting the warmth sink in. The fight was far from over. Gerald would resist, colleagues might falter, and HR might hesitate. But she had built a foundation too solid to ignore. Walking home, she reviewed the plan in her mind. Gather more evidence, corroborate accounts, prepare for formal escalation. She had learned the language of power, the language of contracts, proof, witnesses. Every day her confidence grew. Every documented slight strengthened her position. That evening, Tiana drafted an email to Denise, attaching the compiled evidence. The cursor blinked steadily on the screen, a silent heartbeat of determination. Dear Denise, she wrote, attached is a summary of documented incidents as requested. Please let me know if further clarification or additional statements are needed. I appreciate your support in ensuring a fair and equitable work environment. She paused before hitting send, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Every word mattered, precise and professional, yet firm. Then she pressed send. A sense of resolve settled over her. Gerald might continue his intimidation tactics, but he could no longer hide behind silence or fear. The weight of proof, the certainty of documentation, had shifted the balance. Later that night, she reviewed her notes once more. The pattern was unmistakable. Gerald's behavior was consistent, targeted, and documented. For the first time, she saw not just the challenge but the path forward, an actionable strategy that could not be ignored. And somewhere in that process, Tiana realized she was changing too. She was no longer the quiet employee, shrinking from microaggressions or feigning ignorance. She was deliberate, patient, and powerful in ways that anger alone could never achieve. The fight was far from over, but now she had a weapon Gerald could not underestimate: evidence, clarity, and unwavering resolve. The conference room smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. Tiana entered, folder in hand, her steps steady. Today was the day she would confront Gerald not with anger, but with undeniable proof. HR had agreed to mediate, and upper management had been notified that evidence-backed concerns would be presented. Gerald was already there, leaning against the table with his usual smirk. "Ah, Tiana," he said, voice casual, eyes scanning her like she was a minor inconvenience. "You've been busy, I hear." "Very busy," Tiana replied evenly, setting her folder on the table. She opened it, revealing neatly organized sections: emails, meeting notes, witness statements. Every page carefully labeled. "I've compiled everything relevant to your treatment of me over the past year." He laughed softly, a sound meant to unnerve her. "Treatment? I treat everyone the same. You just take things personally." "I take things personally when my work is questioned unfairly, interrupted, or dismissed in ways others are not subjected to," she said, voice firm. "And when microaggressions and biased remarks accumulate, they're no longer personal, they're systemic." Denise cleared her throat, sliding her chair closer. "Tiana, please continue. Present the evidence clearly. Gerald will review each point together." Tiana flipped to the first page. A series of emails where her contributions were ignored until repeated by a colleague, at which point they were praised. "Notice the pattern here," she said. "Ideas I suggested on February 12th were ignored. On February 14th, when echoed by Jason, they received commendation. That's a pattern, not coincidence." Gerald's smile wavered. "Emails can be misread. That's normal office dynamics." Tiana leaned forward, pointing to a highlighted note. "Office dynamics do not include statements like, 'I don't know why we even hired you,' in front of colleagues. That's not feedback. It's intimidation and humiliation." She turned to the next section: meeting notes. "In the March 3rd team meeting, you interrupted me 6 times, ignored my clarifications, and then publicly questioned my competence. Witnesses, Lisa, Marisol, Jason, can confirm this." Gerald shifted in his chair, eyes narrowing, tapping the table. "People exaggerate. You're making it seem worse than it was." "No," Tiana said, her voice unwavering. "I'm showing exactly what happened. Exaggeration requires emotion. This is documentation, fact by fact." Denise nodded, jotting notes. "Gerald, these are serious concerns. It's clear patterns exist and they've affected Tiana's work environment." He exhaled sharply. "This is ridiculous. You've weaponized a paperwork. You think a few notes make you untouchable." Tiana smiled faintly. "Not untouchable. Countable. Professional. Fair. All I want is for the environment to reflect those standards." She moved to the contract section, opening to the page outlining protection against arbitrary criticism and discriminatory treatment. "This isn't just about perception," she said. "These clauses exist because employees deserve protection from harassment. Your behavior, consistently documented, falls squarely within what this contract protects against." Gerald's jaw tightened, his confidence faltering for the first time. The smirk was gone, replaced by something sharper: unease. "You've really thought this through, haven't you?" "I have," Tiana said calmly. And I've done so because no one else will challenge this. The evidence is clear, the witnesses are willing, and HR has the responsibility to ensure fairness. He leaned back, arms crossed, the air between them taut. So what now? You think you've won? I'm not here to win, she replied. I'm here to make sure accountability exists, that the environment is fair, and that systemic bias doesn't continue unchecked. If the tables are turned by awareness and documentation, then yes, justice is being served. For the first time, Gerald's usual composure cracked. This is going to make things difficult for everyone. Yes, Tiana said softly. Difficult for those who prefer silence and complicity over fairness. But necessary. Denise interjected, voice neutral but firm. We'll be investigating these claims fully. Gerald, you'll have the chance to respond formally, but the documentation Tiana has provided cannot be ignored. There are patterns that require scrutiny. Tiana felt the shift in the room, the first real tremor of change. Gerald's posture was rigid. His usual aura of untouchable authority diminished. The power dynamic had shifted. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the opening she needed. After a pause, Gerald muttered, "This isn't over. You think this is the end?" Tiana closed her folder, standing tall. "No, it's just the beginning of accountability." As she left the conference room, her steps measured but confident, she felt the weight of months of humiliation lifting slightly. Colleagues in the hallway gave quiet, supportive nods. Small gestures but meaningful. The silence of the office was no longer complicity. It was listening. Back at her desk, she opened her laptop and began updating her documentation. Each new entry, every email, every note reinforced the case. Gerald's attempts to intimidate could not erase the evidence, nor the shift in awareness that was already beginning to ripple through the office. By the end of the day, she felt exhausted but empowered. The confrontation had been tense, cinematic in its intensity, but she had maintained composure and control. She had turned fear into leverage, humiliation into documentation, and silence into strategy. That evening, as she walked through the city streets, Tiana allowed herself a small, private smile. The fight was far from over, but the balance had shifted. Gerald had underestimated her, and now he would have to face the consequences of underestimating the power of evidence, preparation, and unwavering resolve. Justice, she knew, wasn't instant, but it had begun. The morning sunlight streamed through the office windows, but Tiana barely noticed it. She was seated in the corner of the HR conference room, laptop open, documents organized, ready for the next phase. Today, the case was no longer just about confrontation, it was about making the evidence undeniable. Denise, the HR manager, was already reviewing her notes. "We've forwarded your documentation to upper management and corporate legal," she said. "They want a full review of Gerald's conduct. You may be called to provide statements and clarify events." Tiana nodded. "I've prepared everything. Dates, emails, witness statements. Every incident is backed up." Denise smiled faintly. "Good. Thorough preparation is key. Your professionalism is evident." Moments later, Gerald arrived. His usual smirk absent. There was a tension in his posture, a subtle twitch in his jaw. Tiana felt the shift immediately. He was no longer the untouchable figure she had feared for months. Now he was aware of the consequences. As upper management representatives joined the room, Gerald's discomfort deepened. He tried to greet them casually, but his voice sounded brittle. "Morning," he said, hands pressed flat against the table. The lead manager, a woman named Carla Jenkins, nodded. "Thank you all for coming. We've reviewed the preliminary documentation. Today we'll discuss the pattern of behavior and determine next steps." Tiana opened her folder and began presenting her evidence. The tone was calm, professional, precise. Emails were highlighted, meeting notes referenced, witness statements summarized. Each slide, each page, made a clear and undeniable case. "This document," Tiana said, pointing to one section, Shows repeated instances where my contributions were ignored until echoed by others. The timeline demonstrates a consistent pattern. This isn't isolated. It's systemic. Carla leaned forward, scanning the documents. Gerald, do you have a response? Gerald shifted uncomfortably. These are all interpretations. I never intended to. Interpretations. Tiana's voice was calm but firm. The dates, emails, and witness statements are facts. Interpretation doesn't change them. An intent doesn't erase impact. The behavior has caused humiliation, stress, and a hostile work environment. A hush fell over the room. Even the legal advisor, a sharply dressed man with a clipboard, looked up from his notes, eyebrows raised. Gerald's confident demeanor wavered. I don't think this warrants. Carla interrupted. Gerald, it warrants a full investigation. Patterns of bias, microaggressions, and intimidation cannot be ignored, especially when substantiated by documentation. HR and legal will conduct interviews, review correspondence, and follow up with witnesses. You will have the opportunity to respond formally. Tiana felt a quiet surge of relief. The power of her preparation had shifted the narrative. No longer was she defending herself against a nebulous sense of injustice. She had transformed the situation into a concrete, undeniable case. Gerald's lips pressed into a thin line. He attempted to interject, but Denise gently placed a hand on the table. Gerald, allow Tiana to finish presenting. Then we will hear your responses in order. Tiana continued, moving to the contract section. As outlined in my employment contract, employees are protected from arbitrary criticism, unfair treatment, and discriminatory practices. The documented incidents here clearly demonstrate violations of these provisions. This is not subjective. It is a contractual obligation. Gerald's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. He opened his mouth to argue but paused, realizing every attempt to dismiss her evidence was futile in the presence of HR, legal, and management. The room remained tense, charged. Colleagues who had been witnesses were brought in, one by one. Marisol, Lisa, and Jason provided statements corroborating Tiana's account, each hesitant but firm. Their voices, once muted by fear of retaliation, now added weight to her case. Carla summarized the session after all witnesses had spoken. The evidence presented establishes a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior and abuse of managerial power. Gerald, HR and legal will review the findings, and appropriate actions will follow. Tiana, your thorough documentation and professionalism have ensured that this matter cannot be ignored. Tiana exhaled quietly, a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction washing over her. She had anticipated resistance, delays, and denials, but the evidence was airtight. The pattern was unmistakable. Gerald could no longer manipulate perception or intimidate colleagues. As she packed her folder, Gerald approached, voice low, almost vulnerable. You really thought this through, didn't you? Tiana met his eyes calmly. Yes, I prepared. I documented. I acted professionally. And now, accountability will follow. He looked away, the usual arrogance stripped from his posture. For the first time, he seemed small in a room he had once dominated. Leaving the office that evening, Tiana felt a quiet sense of triumph. The fight was far from over. Gerald would face investigations, possible suspension, and reputational damage. HR would implement oversight, and management would monitor the environment. But she had done more than protect herself. She had exposed systemic bias, inspired colleagues to speak out, and set a precedent that silence and fear were no longer acceptable. Tiana paused on the steps of the building, looking up at the sky. The city lights shimmered against the dusk, and she felt the weight of months of humiliation lifting slightly. The path had been grueling, emotionally taxing, and exhausting, but justice, however measured and bureaucratic, had begun. She allowed herself a small, private smile. It wasn't vengeance, it was recognition, fairness, and the reclaiming of dignity. She had transformed fear into strategy, humiliation into evidence, and invisibility into presence. The road ahead would still have challenges. Colleagues adjusting, Gerald pushing back, and subtle resistance from those who had long benefited from the silence. But Tiana knew she had shifted the balance. She had shown that power built on fear and bias was vulnerable to preparation, courage, and unwavering resolve. And in that moment, standing on the steps, Tiana understood. Exposing the truth was not only about correcting the past, it was about shaping the future. The office felt different the next morning. Not in its walls, not in the hum of computers, but in the subtle tension lingering in the air. Conversations were quieter, glances sharper, and the usual easy camaraderie had been replaced by cautious awareness. Tiana noticed the change the moment she walked in. Colleagues who had once avoided her gaze now offered quiet nods, while Gerald's presence seemed diminished, his usual confident swagger replaced by measured steps. The corporate email that circulated overnight confirmed what everyone already suspected. Gerald was suspended pending a formal investigation. His responsibilities were reassigned temporarily, and upper management had announced an internal review of HR procedures. The announcement didn't name Tiana, but everyone knew who had precipitated the change. Tiana settled at her desk, the weight of the previous weeks pressing in. Victory felt hollow in some ways. She had won accountability, but at the cost of mental strain, sleepless nights, and relentless anxiety. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her laptop, reviewing the email from Denise. "Thank you for your professionalism and courage. Your documentation was thorough and instrumental in bringing these issues to light. HR is committed to addressing systemic concerns going forward." Tiana exhaled, a mix of relief and exhaustion flooding her. She allowed herself a moment to acknowledge her achievement, but the tension hadn't entirely lifted. The office could heal, yes, but there would be lingering consequences for her, for Gerald, for everyone involved. At lunch, Lisa approached cautiously. "Hey, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner," she said quietly. "And, thank you for showing us it was possible to stand up." Tiana gave a small smile. "It's not about me. It's about all of us recognizing what's acceptable, and what isn't. That takes courage, yes, but it also takes action." Marisol joined them, whispering, "I feel like things might actually change this time. People are paying attention now." Tiana nodded. "They will, but it won't be immediate. Culture doesn't shift overnight. We have to keep pushing, documenting, speaking up. That's how change lasts." Meanwhile, Gerald was quietly escorted from the building later in the day, briefcase in hand. The usual whispers followed him, rumors of suspension, investigation, and the fallout from months of unchecked behavior. Some colleagues looked on with schadenfreude, others with unease, recognizing the fragility of power built on intimidation. HR and legal worked quickly to review the documentation Tiana had provided. Witness interviews were conducted, emails examined, and meetings transcribed. The evidence was irrefutable, and even Gerald's attempts to explain away his behavior faltered under the weight of corroborated facts. By midweek, management issued another communication. Gerald would face disciplinary action and further training, and HR would implement new oversight measures to prevent recurrence. The changes were procedural, yes, but the symbolism was powerful. A manager who had relied on fear and bias could no longer wield unchecked power. Tiana, however, remained cautious. She had learned that exposure and accountability were only part of the battle. Emotional fallout lingered. She still felt the residue of humiliation, the tension of months of oppression, and the fear of subtle retaliation. It wasn't something that vanished with an email or HR announcement. That evening, she reflected in the quiet of her apartment. The fight had been exhausting, and the victory, though meaningful, came with a cost. Her body still tensed at memories of Gerald's smirk, the sneer, the laughter meant to belittle. But she also recognized her resilience. She had documented, strategized, and acted with unwavering clarity. She had transformed fear into a tool, invisibility into presence, and silence into power. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Denise. Team morale is shifting positively. People are reporting more openness and collaboration. Your courage has inspired change beyond just your situation. Tiana allowed herself a genuine smile. The work environment was beginning to recalibrate, slowly, imperfectly, but deliberately. Her actions had ripple effects, encouraging others to recognize injustice and speak up, even in small ways. The following week, subtle but significant changes were evident. Team meetings became more structured, with clearer expectations for inclusivity. Colleagues began to speak up for one another, citing fairness rather than fear. Gerald, removed from decision-making roles temporarily, became a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked bias carried consequences. Tiana also began mentoring newer colleagues quietly, sharing strategies for documentation and navigating workplace challenges. Her experience had given her insight into both systemic failures and the ways individuals could assert agency within flawed structures. Yet she remained aware of the cost. Her evenings were quieter, spent decompressing rather than socializing. Sleep came in fits, and the anxiety of months-long scrutiny lingered. But these were the residual scars of resistance, a reminder that fighting injustice required both courage and endurance. By Friday, Tiana walked through the office with a measured calm. She exchanged greetings with colleagues, who now treated her with respect, acknowledgement, and even admiration. The weight of fear had lifted slightly. The quiet solidarity of others signaled that her efforts were not in vain. Pausing at her desk, she looked at her contract folder, now neatly archived. It had been more than paper. It had been a shield, a guide, and a symbol of her unwavering resolve. Gerald's downfall was not about revenge. It was about accountability. And in that, there was justice measured and real. For the first time in months, Tiana allowed herself to breathe fully. She knew the battle against bias and inequity was ongoing, but she had reclaimed her dignity, inspired others to recognize injustice, and established that silence and fear could no longer dominate the office. Standing by the window, watching the city glow with the early evening lights, she reflected on the journey. Humiliation, resilience, documentation, confrontation, and exposure. The road had been harrowing, but the lessons were clear. Courage, preparation, and unwavering resolve could shift even the most entrenched patterns of power. And while the emotional cost remained, the empowerment she had gained was undeniable. Justice, slow and deliberate, had arrived. The office felt lighter, though not entirely free. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, computers clicked methodically, and yet, Tiana noticed a subtle shift in energy. Conversations were measured but genuine. Colleagues now approached her with a quiet respect, some still hesitant, others emboldened by the precedent she had set. The environment wasn't perfect, but it was moving toward fairness, a hard-won equilibrium. Gerald Kramer was gone from his managerial role. The investigation had concluded, confirming a clear pattern of bias and abuse of power. HR and upper management had imposed disciplinary measures, suspension, mandatory training, and oversight that limited his authority. His reputation, once unassailable, now carried the weight of documented misconduct. The office whispered, as offices always do, but this time the murmurs carried caution, not admiration. Tiana walked past his old office, the door closed and locked, and felt a mixture of vindication and lingering tension. Justice had been served, yes, but at a cost. Months of anxiety, sleepless nights, and emotional strain had left their mark. Her chest tightened as she recalled the public humiliations, the whispered jokes, and the constant microaggressions that had chipped away at her confidence. She sat at her desk, opening her laptop. Emails from colleagues thanked her discreetly for inspiring courage, sharing stories of subtle injustices they had endured silently. Each message was a reminder that her struggle had created a ripple, one that encouraged awareness, accountability, and action. Denise from HR appeared at her side, a smile tugging at her lips. Tiana, the office environment is already changing. People are noticing that bias and harassment are being taken seriously. Your professionalism and preparation set the standard. Tiana nodded. It's not just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been silenced or dismissed. And it's about making sure systems don't let that happen again. Marisol came over, holding a stack of files. Hey, thought you might want to see these. Management is asking for recommendations on how to improve inclusivity, and they want your input. Tiana glanced at the files. They were proposals for training, structured feedback systems, and transparent reporting mechanisms. Steps she had hoped for but didn't expect to be implemented so soon. She smiled faintly, recognizing the significance. Her struggle had catalyzed tangible structural change. Yet, she knew the personal cost was ongoing. Her evenings were quieter, filled with reflection rather than socializing. She still carried the tension in her shoulders, the subtle nervousness that came from months of navigating a hostile environment. Sleep came more easily now, but the nightmares of confrontation and intimidation lingered at the edges of her rest. Even so, she had learned resilience. She had discovered the power of meticulous preparation, strategic action, and unwavering self-respect. She had transformed humiliation into agency, fear into leverage, and silence into testimony. The emotional toll remained, but alongside it came empowerment, dignity, and clarity. By the end of the week, a meeting was held to discuss long-term improvements in office culture. Tiana presented her recommendations: clear documentation protocols, regular bias awareness training, and formal channels for reporting misconduct. The room listened attentively, nodding, some with pens poised to implement changes. The influence she wielded now was not just personal, it was structural, shaping the environment for future employees. As she left the office that evening, the sky painted in streaks of orange and violet, she paused at the corner of the building. The city moved on, unaware of the battles fought within fluorescent-lit walls, yet she carried a profound sense of accomplishment. Justice had arrived. Not instant, not dramatic, but deliberate, measured, and enduring. Tiana knew the journey was far from over. Systemic bias did not vanish overnight, and vigilance would remain necessary. But she had demonstrated that courage, preparation, and unwavering resolve could confront even entrenched power. She had not sought revenge, only accountability, and the results had been transformative. Walking toward the subway, she reflected on the emotional landscape she now navigated: relief, lingering trauma, quiet pride, and renewed purpose. She had reclaimed her dignity, inspired her colleagues, and changed the rules of the office game. The fight had been hard, exhausting, and deeply personal, but it had also been meaningful. That night at home, she sat by the window overlooking the city lights. The glow was steady, persistent, much like the resilience she had discovered within herself. The scars of the battle, mental strain, sleepless nights, emotional tension, remained, but they were now markers of endurance and courage rather than fear. For the first time in months, Tiana allowed herself to breathe fully. She had faced humiliation, systemic bias, and the abuse of authority, and emerged not just intact but stronger. She had rewritten the narrative of her workplace, asserting that no individual, no matter their position, was above accountability. The office would continue to change, slowly, imperfectly, but intentionally. And Tiana would continue to walk those halls, not with fear or hesitation, but with quiet authority, resilience, and hope. She had learned that justice was rarely instantaneous or complete, but when combined with courage, evidence, and strategic action, it could leave an enduring mark. As the city shimmered below, Tiana whispered to herself, almost in awe, "We change what we can and endure the rest." The words were a promise, not just to herself, but to everyone who had been silenced, dismissed, or humiliated. The journey had cost her, but it had also renewed her. The weekend after the dust settled, Tiana sat in a quiet cafe, her laptop open, but not for work. Instead, she was journaling, reflecting on the months that had reshaped her life. The hum of espresso machines, soft jazz playing in the background, and the murmur of conversations created a comforting cocoon. She sipped her coffee slowly, thinking back to the day Gerald Kramer had first humiliated her in front of the team. The words he had spat, deliberate cutting, had felt like a physical blow. She remembered the heat rushing to her face, the tightening in her chest, the helplessness as colleagues looked away. And yet here she was, months later, holding more than her dignity. She held proof that courage, documentation, and relentless persistence could overcome institutional bias. She had turned fear into preparation, humiliation into agency, and invisibility into influence. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Marisol. "Coffee. I want to hear how you're really feeling after everything." Tiana smiled, typing back, "Sure. 10 minutes. When Marisol arrived, she was carrying 2 pastries and a knowing look. They settled at the small table by the window, sunlight washing over them. "You look lighter," Marisol said. "Like the weights lifted." Tiana nodded. "It is. But not completely. Months of stress don't just vanish overnight. The mental toll lingers." He paused. "But I feel empowered. And I've learned that documentation isn't just paperwork. It's a lifeline in environments where silence is demanded and injustice thrives." Marisol reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You've inspired more people than you realize. The office is different now. People speak up, they listen, they support each other. You set a standard." Tiana smiled faintly, heart swelling. "It's strange, isn't it? I thought I was fighting just for myself. But the ripple effect, it feels bigger than I expected." They shared a quiet moment, letting the warm sunlight fill the space between them. Outside, the city moved with its usual rhythm, unaware of the battles fought in fluorescent-lit offices, the courage that shifted power, and the lives quietly altered. Returning home that evening, Tiana walked slowly, savoring the rhythm of her own thoughts. She passed a small park, watching children play and couples stroll, and allowed herself a rare, unguarded smile. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace, hard-earned, fragile, and beautiful. At her apartment, she opened a notebook and began to draft a new project, not work-related but personal, a guide for navigating workplace bias. Her experiences, she realized, could help others who found themselves trapped in silence, unsure how to assert agency without risking retaliation. She detailed strategies for documentation, gathering witnesses, and maintaining professionalism in the face of systemic inequities. Each page she wrote felt like planting seeds, a way to ensure that her struggles could nurture change beyond her own environment. Later that night, as she looked out over the city skyline, Tiana reflected on the journey. The humiliation, the confrontation, the painstaking documentation, the exposure, and the eventual accountability. Each step had left scars, yes, but also lessons. She had discovered resilience she didn't know she possessed, the power of precision and preparation, and the importance of refusing to remain silent. Her phone buzzed again, another text, this time from Lisa. "Thinking of applying for that new project leadership role. I feel like things might actually be different now. Thanks for paving the way." Tiana typed back quickly. "You'll be amazing. And yes, the environment is changing, slowly but surely. Don't let fear hold you back." The words resonated with her. Fear had been a constant companion through the ordeal, but it had been replaced by clarity, resolve, and a sense of purpose. She had learned that courage was not a single moment, but a series of deliberate, persistent actions. As the night deepened, she closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. The quiet of the apartment was soothing. The city lights blinked like distant stars, mirroring the small but significant victories that had illuminated her path. Tiana knew the work wasn't truly over. Change, even after exposure and accountability, required vigilance. There would be future challenges, subtle biases, systemic obstacles, and the slow grind of cultural shift. But she also knew she had the tools, the strength, and the confidence to navigate them. And beyond that, she had a renewed sense of herself. She was no longer defined by fear or humiliation. She was defined by courage, resilience, and the unwavering commitment to fairness. Her fight had transformed not just her environment, but her own understanding of her worth and agency. Finally, she rose from the chair, stretching, letting the lingering tension ease from her shoulders. The battle had exacted a cost, emotional, physical, mental, but it had also created opportunity, growth, and empowerment. She was ready to move forward, both in her career and in life, carrying the lessons learned and the confidence gained. Looking out the window one last time before sleep, Tiana whispered to herself, a soft but firm affirmation. We endure. We persist. We rise. The city slept beneath her, but she felt awake, alive, alert, and ready for the next chapter. The first day of the new quarter felt different. Brighter, almost electric. Tiana walked into the office carrying her laptop bag and a quiet confidence that had been hard-earned. Gerald Kramer's shadow no longer loomed over the halls. He had been formally removed from his managerial position, and structural changes were in place to prevent further abuse of power. The office, once heavy with tension and quiet compliance, now hummed with cautious optimism. At her desk, she noticed small changes. Team members now openly credited one another for ideas, meetings were more inclusive, and feedback was structured and documented. HR had implemented a transparent reporting system, and management had scheduled regular bias awareness sessions. These were small gestures, yet monumental in their significance. Tiana smiled faintly. Months of meticulous documentation, courage, and confrontation had culminated in systemic change. Marisol leaned over from the next desk. You notice it too, right? The difference? I do, Tiana replied. It's not perfect, but it's progress. And that progress is tangible. Lisa approached as well, carrying a folder. Tiana, management wants you to lead a new internal workshop on professionalism and handling workplace bias. They think your experience could help others navigate difficult situations. Tiana blinked, surprise mingling with gratitude. Me. Led. Yes, Lisa said, smiling. You've already shown what courage and preparation can do. They want to formalize it. Tiana exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the recognition sink in. For months, she had felt powerless, silenced, and scrutinized. Now, her experience, the pain, the research, the courage, was being recognized as a tool for empowerment, not just a story of suffering. The workshop planning took the afternoon. Tiana drafted an agenda that combined practical strategies with personal reflection. She included techniques for documenting incidents, maintaining professionalism under pressure, and building support networks. She also incorporated role-playing scenarios to help colleagues practice speaking up without fear of retaliation. As she typed, she reflected on the journey that had led her here. Gerald's public humiliation, the whispered jokes, the microaggressions, the long nights of documentation, the HR meetings, and the final exposure. Each step had been emotionally taxing, leaving scars that still tingled faintly in the quiet moments. Yet those scars had become markers of resilience, proof that she had endured, learned, and transformed adversity into agency. By late afternoon, Tiana paused and looked around the office. Colleagues were chatting quietly, exchanging ideas without hesitation. A sense of shared responsibility permeated the space. The air was lighter. Respect, once forced and brittle, now carried substance. Her phone buzzed. A message from Denise. Management is thrilled with your leadership and insight. The workshop will be a pilot for company-wide implementation. Tiana smiled. This is bigger than me, she whispered. The ripple effect of her courage, careful documentation, and unwavering resolve was shaping not only her environment but the broader culture of the workplace. Later, as she left the office, the city was bathed in golden light. She paused on the steps, taking a deep breath of crisp evening air. The skyline stretched out before her, lights flickering like a constellation of possibilities. She felt a quiet, unshakable sense of accomplishment, not just for holding her ground, but for creating a path others could follow. The fight had been costly. The emotional toll had been heavy, leaving lingering anxiety and fatigue. But the lessons she carried were priceless. Courage in the face of systemic injustice, the power of evidence, and the importance of refusing to be silent. She had learned to transform fear into preparation, humiliation into strategy, and marginalization into influence. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from a colleague she had mentored quietly over the past few weeks. "Just wanted to say thank you. I finally feel like I can speak up. You gave me courage I didn't know I had." Tiana's heart swelled. Her personal journey had ignited change in others, proving that resistance could empower not only oneself but an entire community. Walking home, she felt a sense of renewal. The trauma of the past months remained, faintly echoing in her chest, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. Instead, it had been transformed into clarity, focus, and the confidence to face future challenges. She was no longer reacting to fear. She was acting from strength. That night, as she gazed out over the city lights from her apartment, she made a promise to herself: to continue advocating for fairness, to mentor and uplift others, and to never allow fear or silence to dictate her path again. She had learned the hard way that systemic change required persistence, courage, and careful strategy, but it was achievable. Tiana whispered into the quiet, a mantra and affirmation in one. "We endure. We resist. We rise." And in that moment, she knew it was only the beginning. New opportunities, challenges, and horizons awaited. She had reclaimed her dignity, inspired change, and proved that justice, when combined with preparation and courage, was possible. The path forward was uncertain, but it was hers to walk. With a final glance at the city below, she closed her laptop, took a deep breath, and stepped into the night, ready for whatever came next.